The story or stories you are about to hear are to entertain. The writers of these stories may claim they are true, yet they may not be. That is up to you to decide. After all, this world is a strange one. Talented narrator Nicole Goodnight from the No Sleep podcast joins us again today as we experience these allegedly true stories about demonic encounters. Time to burn some incense and call over those preacher boys. Because if you can't feel safe in your own home, where can you go? Enjoy these paranormal stories and be sure to send me your terrifying encounters because I'd love to narrate them. Just go to darkstories.org. I'm specifically looking for stories about fishing. Also, you can follow Nicole Goodnight on Twitter at @NRGoodnight. Now, let's begin. The Demon Lady from XX Dean XX. I was about 7 years old. My brother Reggie was around 9. My mother, who was a stay-at-home mom, took care of me and Reggie almost 24/7, while her girlfriend was away at work. We'll call her girlfriend Jay. She worked at the Comfort Inn hotel in town and was away at work for the usual 9 to 5. Jay had begun dating my mom a few months after I turned 1 in November of 2006, and I was really close with Jay. I'd like to say out of us 2 kids, I was the favorite. Now skip ahead to when I was 7. This older lady who appeared to be in her 60s or 70s had stayed at the hotel for a week. I'm pretty sure it was to see her family. She had got to the hotel by some sort of public transportation, and when the week was over, she had to leave. But she didn't have any more money to pay for a ride home, and ended up asking Jay to drive her home. Now keep in mind that apparently she lived all the way in Ohio. That was a long way from our small Pennsylvania town. But Jay agreed, so they put the lady's things in the trunk of Jay's little Mazda SUV and made their way to Ohio. A few months later, I was watching TV in the living room eating a PB&J, drinking a Capri Sun pouch. You know, the typical little kid things. When Jay walks into the living room from the kitchen and announces to my family that we're going to stay at Kay's house. I looked at her confused, because I'd never heard of this Kay before. So I said curiously, "Who's that?" "Kay, you know, the old lady from the hotel." Then I remembered who she was talking about. I guess I was confused because I didn't know her name. I was curious as to why we'd be staying with her. She was a complete stranger, right? But I didn't question it, because being so young, I figured the adults know best. So I innocently said, okay. We had finished packing up around an hour later. Once everything was packed up in the car and ready, we set off for Ohio. It took what felt to be the longest 3 hours of my life to finally find this woman's house, but we eventually did and pulled into her driveway. We saw her waiting on the sun porch. From inside the car, I began to observe the outside of her house, and I saw that her garage was just hanging wide open. There weren't any cars in there either, nor were there cars in the driveway. Ours was the only one there. To me, that was a little weird, but I just set the thought aside and exited the car to help my family bring our stuff inside. Once inside, I continued to observe my surroundings, which is what I usually did when being in a house I'd never seen before. Her place was dimly lit because she only had dim lamps turned on in her living room, and the rest of the entire house was totally dark inside. My parents began to ask Kay some simple questions, and one of her answers cleared up my suspicion as to why there were no cars in the driveway. Jay had asked if she lived with anyone, and she said she was a widow, and her son had moved away to college, which is what cleared up my curiosity. After she showed my parents around the main floor, she took us outside to cook hamburgers and such on her grill. She had offered my mom some soda, which my mom kindly accepted, and she asked us kids as well, but we said no thanks. While the adults were on the back porch, talking and grilling food, my brother and I were playing pretending to be Transformers or something. My brother was Optimus Prime and I was Megatron, I believe. We were in her backyard. Soon the food was done, so they turned off the grill and we all headed inside to eat. When she started serving us hamburgers, I sweetly declined because I'm weird about who makes certain foods for me. Like, I would only eat mashed potatoes if my mom makes them, or I would only eat hamburgers if Jade made them. Since me and my brother didn't want any burgers, she told us with a sweet smile, "Wait right here," and walked over to her stove, pulling out a pan and came back over to where us kids were. There were freshly baked brownies in the pan. It smelled so fresh and chocolatey. They looked delicious. She asked if Reggie and I wanted some. We excitedly said yes. She dished out a couple of slices of brownies, one for me and one for Reggie. After that, she told us, "By the way, you kids can call me Grammy K." It was in the sweetest but creepy voice. I thought this was the strangest thing the lady had said so far. Our brownie slices had been devoured by me and my brother pretty quick. It was really good. Too good, if I say so myself. Eventually, everybody had finished eating and such, so she took my family to the dim living room to just talk and watch TV. When Reggie and I sat down to watch TV, there was this weird show about Jesus airing. It was discussing how he died and was resurrected and things like that. It wasn't very interesting for a kid like me. I remember being more interested in shows like SpongeBob or even Dora. The rest of my family didn't seem to be really into the TV program either, but after what felt like forever, everyone decided they were tired and it was time for bed. Kay asked if my brother and I could sleep downstairs in the basement with her, which I thought was extremely creepy, but apparently my brother didn't. He said yes over and over about 5 times in the most hyperactive way. And for another odd reason, my parents said we could. We headed downstairs with her, though I was hesitant. The basement was actually surprisingly well kept. It had carpet, drywall, a ceiling, nothing like the expected brick walls and cement floor and such. She told us we didn't have to worry about bugs or spiders because she had her basement sprayed for bugs like that every month. She then took us through the doorway to the other room off to the main room to show us around in there. There were multiple sections of the basement. Once we made it to that other room, it was pitch black, and you couldn't see anything, not even from the light coming from the main room, because like her living room, it was dimly lit. While we were standing there in the doorway to this mysterious dark room, she reaches for something on a table next to her. It was a flashlight. Once she switched it on and shone it throughout the room so we could see. She told us it was dark in there because when she had her basement remodeled, they didn't fix the lighting right, so the light for the room didn't work. When I looked around to observe the place, it wasn't as nice and homey looking as the main area. This room looked like the typical scary basement. Brick walls, cement floor, and a rafter ceiling. My brother had asked Kay jokingly, "Are there any demons in there?" She looked at him with almost a stern expression for a second, then said back with an innocent fun laugh in her voice, "No, we had the exterminator spray for those too." She took us back to the main room to lay down for bed. She gathered up some pillows and blankets for us, and finally we were comfortable and ready for sleep. Around half an hour later, right before I drifted off to dreamland, I heard Reggie say in a desperate whisper, "Dean, are you awake?" Annoyed, I opened my eyes directing them to him, and I whispered back, "What?" He says to me, kind of worried, "I'm scared. I can't sleep." I asked him why, and he responded, "There are demons watching me from the other room. If I move, they're going to get me." Being a 7-year-old, I had a big imagination, and it took me until I was an astonishing 12 years old to finally control it. But when he said that to me, I thought he was trying to scare me. I was the crybaby of the family. Just about everything frightened me. I told him, "Nuh-uh, just go back to sleep, Bubby." I had closed my eyes and tried to fall back to sleep, which was very hard for me when I was younger. I had ADHD, which turned into ADD with age. But to fall asleep, I had to take melatonin, which later stopped working. Then I had to start taking clonidine to fall asleep. Anyway, as I was slowly falling asleep again, I hear my brother start up once more with his nonsense. This time he said it with more fear than the first. "She is staring at me. She's watching me, sissy." Once I heard him say this, I had a mix of worry and confusion and annoyance. I said back to him, "Bubby, what are you talking about? Mommy and Jay are going to be mad at us if we don't get some sleep." He replied with tearful terror this time, "No, she's watching me, and her eyes are solid black." Following that, he tells me to look at her. Her eyes are black. Dean, look at her. I look out of suspicion, which was quickly turned to fear, when I see what he's talking about. And her eyes were black, blacker than the night itself. I know this is hard to believe, but I swear on my life that her eyes were black as darkness. It was the old lady, Kay, just lying there where she'd been sleeping. She wasn't saying anything, she wasn't moving. She was still covered with her blanket, staring right at my brother, not blinking. I must have been in shock. I didn't know what to say or do about the black-eyed, motionless lady we were stuck down there with. Trying to be brave, I told Reggie, "Bubby, come over here. Stay close to me." Tears were welling up in his eyes as he whined in his whisper of a voice, "I can't. If I move, she'll get me." Neither of us knew what was going on or what to do. We lay there silently crying for a moment, when Kay sits up. Her body was very still. The best way I can explain to you the posture of this woman's body was like she was standing in formation, as if she were in the army or boot camp, how they stand very firm and perfectly rigid. Her eyes were still black. We were both scared, very scared, not wanting to move because we didn't know what she would do if we did. I know this story sounds odd. I don't know how I can stress it to you enough that this memory is vivid and real. I wish it was a dream. I wish it was fake. In that moment, I was in such terrible shock that I stopped crying, and I sat there darting my eyes back and forth from Kay to Reggie. I was almost in what I could describe as a trance of fear, which was why I wasn't moving or crying anymore, but rather just sitting there, waiting. During that state, I hear my brother start yelling for my mom and Jay, which I guess broke me out of this trance. I hear their feet come stomping towards the sound of a terrified boy. They were down there faster than the Flash himself could ever go. As soon as they reached the basement where we were, they flipped on the light, and strangely enough, as soon as my mom's finger hit the light switch, Kay's body fell back down, loosely, back to a comfortable sleeping position, and her eyes closed, as if she was pretending to be asleep, like she knew she had been caught. My mom and Jay start freaking out and asking us what had happened, and Kay wakes up, seemingly clueless as to what happened, saying, "What's going on?" My parents are asking the same question. Me and my brother are trying to explain that to them. They believed us. I don't know why, but they believed us. They took us and ran upstairs, Kay coming upstairs shortly after. They take us to her room, which is where they were supposed to sleep, and they shut the door with my brother and me, my mom and Jay freaking out. Suddenly, for some reason, my parents open the door and step into the living room, telling a confused Kay that our friend who was looking after our pets at the house called and said the upstairs had flooded, even though that was a lie. A lie to get us out of there. We gathered our things in a hurry, and right before we made it outside, she came up to us and handed me and my brother these glass objects, which she explained to us that when you put them in the windowsill and let sunlight shine through them, it would create a pretty shadow in the shape of the glass on the wall. My mom accepted them from her hands, and we quickly got our stuff packed up in the car, taking off, heading back home. On our way back, my mom stopped at the next gas station and threw the glass things away. Then we continued on. After a 3-hour drive, we just went straight to bed. None of us had any idea what had just happened. I think the reason why my mom believed us was because she had a few paranormal experiences of her own. She was a big believer of ghosts and such. To this day, I'm still a little confused as to what happened. But I know what I saw, and I will always remember the fear I felt. I know I'd never felt that much fear in my life. I believe that what I saw was perhaps a demon attempting to possess the old woman, or having already possessed her. That might explain the weird TV show about Jesus she had playing on the TV earlier. It might be why her house was so dim. It just might be why her eyes turned black and why she had been acting so strange. I have had many paranormal experiences since then, but nothing as terrifying as this. Maybe I'll share them another time, but thank you for listening to my story about the Demon Lady.
Eyes in the Night by Lniax. One cool but comfortable evening about a month ago, my fiancé and I went spotlighting for deer in eastern North Carolina. We started out on the back roads around our home, with the beam of our spotlight piercing the dark wood line. Here and there, we would stop and get out when we saw deer that were blinded by the light so he could gauge if they were bucks or not. About 30 minutes in, we find ourselves down a gravel path that we had not known was there. We headed down, searching the woods, and then I turned the beam to a patch of woods where multiple sets of slanted yellow eyes in a single tree were staring back at us. Stephen exclaimed out loud, wondering what could be, and told me to stop the car. As I did so, a wave of uncertainty washed over me. Something wasn't right with this scenario. We got out of the car with the light still fixated on the sight before us. The tree was about 100 yards ahead. Utter silence ensued, with my heart feeling like it was beating to a heavy metal crescendo. I heard Stephen start counting the pairs, reaching 8, and as he did, they started disappearing until only one set was left. We took a few steps, albeit reluctantly on my part, as Stephen started walking faster towards the tree. I stopped him as I zeroed the light onto the center of the tree. What we saw still has us baffled and scared to this day. The creature was moving side to side halfway up the tree, with the eyes never blinking or moving away from us. We could detect a long, pale body moving back and forth as it stared us down. The dread I had been feeling finally made its way up to my head, and I told Stephen to get to the car. I walked backwards, never taking my eyes off the creature until I reached the safety of the car. When I zoned the light back up to the tree, the creature was gone. The ride home was quiet for the first few seconds, until the shock ran off, and Stephen asked if I had seen the same thing he had. All I could do was nod my head as I was shaking from what we had just seen. Needless to say, we haven't gone spotlighting ever since this occurred. A week later, we were sitting in our living room watching a movie one night. Our house is situated literally in the middle of nowhere, with fields and trees surrounding us on all sides. Next thing we know, we hear 3 knocks on the window behind the couch, followed by a scratching sound. Terrified, we couldn't do anything but sit frozen, listening to the scratching. Our dogs went crazy, barking and carrying on with their hackles raised while they followed the sound throughout the length of our house. After about an hour, it ceased. It hasn't returned. We did some research online and are thinking it must have been either a Wendigo or a skinwalker. While doing this, I recalled a memory from when I was 16 to 17 years of age, riding home with a girlfriend from a school event. I must have repressed this until I started searching for answers to what Stephen and I saw on the woodline that night. My girlfriend was driving down this long, windy road heading home to Bath, North Carolina, while I was manning the radio. There were a few houses scattered here and there, but mostly forests and fields lined the road. I found a song we both liked and settled back into my seat. Turning my head to the right, I saw this shape running parallel with the car. At first I thought it was a dog, but as I peered more intently, I noticed it was almost shaped like a square and really low to the ground. Its legs were disjointed looking, like a spider, but with only 4 legs. No other features were discernible as the moonlight was ebbing as clouds moved through the night. I yelled my friend's name and she startled, cutting the radio down, wondering why I had screamed. When she saw the shape keeping pace with her car going 60 miles per hour, her face went pale and she stomped on the gas pedal. We hit 80 miles per hour with this monstrosity keeping pace. As we came up to a curve, the creature veered off from beside us and disappeared into the night. We never spoke of this incident again until I called her up and asked if she remembered that night. She went quiet and said she had never spoken to anyone about what she saw, but our recollections were the same. All I can say is this really happened to us, and if you don't believe it, then it's on you to go venturing into our forests at night. There are things in these woods that we can only begin to imagine.
Never open your door for the late trick-or-treater. From H.H. This experience occurred last October on Halloween. I've been looking for the right place to share it, but now I figured I've got the right spot. At least in my neighborhood, there's an unspoken rule that trick-or-treating ends at 10 p.m. Usually the kids walking around come at different times depending on their age. The cute little 4 to 7-year-olds come earliest, when it's still light out. They're probably my favorite. Then comes the older kids. They're kinda awkward and silly. Finally comes the kids who are a bit self-conscious about still trick-or-treating. Freshmen and sophomores, really. They're the best for pranking, so I enjoy that a lot. Last Halloween died down around 9:50, and I retired to my couch with the leftover candy. Outside, the sounds of kids faded as they deserted the streets one by one, signaling the sound of Halloween. I fell asleep around midnight. The surrounding area, a graveyard of Jolly Rancher wrappers and lollipop sticks. I woke up suddenly to a timid rap on the door. Sitting up half asleep, I'm pretty sure I asked who it was, but my mind was too foggy to be sure. The next knock was much louder and shook the cobwebs from my brain. I jumped off the couch and cautiously approached the door. Through the peephole, I saw a small boy wearing a surprisingly authentic-looking classical suit. It was perfectly ironed and inky black. His face was pale and smooth, with a vibrant blush in his rounded cheeks. The most stunning part, however, were his bright blue eyes. They were piercing, almost. I opened the door and greeted the kid. I asked him what he was doing up so late and where his parents were. He replied that he was hungry and just wanted candy. He ignored my second question. I hesitantly brought the candy bowl to him. He fished through the bowl and dug his hand to the bottom. He felt around for a while, never actually looking at the bowl. I found that odd, but I didn't say anything. All of a sudden, the kid screamed and pulled his hand out of the bowl. His hand was bleeding fiercely. I freaked out and grabbed paper towels, trying to wipe the blood away, but the kid kept screaming and slapping my hand. He gave me a haunting, accusing stare with those deep blue eyes. He pointed at me and yelled with tears running down his cheeks. He yelled that I tried, but now I'll pay. I had no idea what he was trying to say. I then noticed these fishhooks stuck in the boy's hand, and at that moment I thought that this was a ruse to pin me for trying to harm a child. so some desperate family could get me for money. But the kid screamed, continuing to bleed. His eyes went wide. He grabbed his arms and swatted all over his body like they were bees attacking him. I watched in horror as fishhooks protruded everywhere from his body. My porch was now a puddle of blood. I slammed the door, and within a few minutes the screaming stopped. I wondered how no one had heard the child scream, and I hoped desperately that it was all some twisted hallucination. But then I woke up. I felt refreshed at first. The sun was shining brightly through the windows. It seemed like a good morning. The events of the previous night, they seemed to be a vague memory, rather a dream. In fact, I was almost entirely convinced it was a dream. When I stepped outside, to be sure, there was no puddle of blood. None of the neighbors said anything about hearing a screaming child in the middle of the night. It was normal. But there was one thing that keeps me from setting this aside as simply a dream. Halfway through the day, I realized that I had been clutching something in my hand, and when I looked, it was a small, rusty fishhook.
Demons in the Closet by TheStormGatherer. When I was a little girl, about 6 years old, my family moved into an old Victorian-style house on the bad side of town. It was the best we could do at the time. My family consisted of me, my younger brother, my 2 older sisters, and my mom. We're born-again Christians, so demons are nothing new to us. Right off the bat, we could tell something was off about the house. My mom would hear children's laughter coming from upstairs when no one else was home. People would get pushed as they were walking down the stairs, causing them to fall. And occasionally, we would see the back of a woman resembling my sister-in-law, who did not live with us, running on all 4s up the old servant's staircase that went from the kitchen into the back upstairs bedroom. For about 2 years of the 7 we lived there, the creepy encounters were fairly harmless. But something changed. I'm not sure what triggered it, but things took a sort of a meaner turn. One night, I was laying on my bed reading when I heard something rustle in my closet. I assumed it was my sister's cat, so I ignored it and kept reading. A few minutes went by and I heard more rustling. Starting to get a bit creeped out, I put my book down and sat up to listen, hoping it had just been my imagination. That's when I heard it. A low whisper coming from behind the door. Tempest. Hey, Tempest. Come over here and open the door. We want to talk to you. At first, I thought it might be one of my sisters trying to scare me, so I responded to the voice saying, "Tessa, if you're trying to scare me, it's not working. I'm trying to read, and if you don't leave me alone, then I'm going to tell Mom." The voice quietly laughed. "I'm not Tessa. Come here and talk to us. We have something we need to tell you." The doorknob started slowly turning, and the rustling got louder. "Come here. We won't hurt you." I was scared now. I didn't want to see what was in my closet. I didn't want to hear what they had to say, so I stood up on my bed and clutched a pillow in front of me as I said to the voice, "I'm not going to open the door, and I'm done talking to you. I know what you are, and you can't hurt me." I swear that door started to slowly open. Whatever was in there had decided it was coming to me. I threw my pillow as hard as my scrawny 8-year-old arms could at the closet and leapt off my bed to the bedroom door just a few feet away and ran screaming downstairs to my mom. She had heard me scream and was already running to the stairs, ready to beat the crap out of whatever had scared me. She immediately went up to my closet and whipped the door open, only to find nothing. She searched the entire house, including the attic and the basement. Absolutely nothing. The next day, my older brother came by. He and my mom went through the house anointing every doorway and praying over every room. That stopped the majority of the activity, but occasionally one of us would wake up with a 6-fingered handprint bruised into our ribs or across our necks. I wish I could say that the activity stopped after we moved. Unfortunately, it continued, but that's another story for a different day.
Red. From Jess. Some years ago, I opened a convenience store in the front part of my barn. A wall divided the store from the storage. My neighbor, a single woman with 5 children living at home, used a Ouija board to search for her true love. Her children would come into the store for the free snacks I'd give them, and a lot of times they'd even come for supper when their mom didn't feel like cooking. They began to refer to me as Grandpa, and loved Red, my dog. I had installed a heavy plank door securely locking between the store part and storage to keep customers from entering. One afternoon, as the children munched snacks and spent time with Red, they spoke of the bad thing in their house, a thing that pulled covers off of them at night and tried to pull them out of bed by their feet. They said that it did bad things to their mother. I wondered if it wasn't just their overactive imaginations. Now, I usually stayed open until midnight before closing out the register. One evening, I was interrupted by a masculine sneeze that came from the storage area. What the heck? There was no way anyone could be in there. Both the outside and inside doors were locked. I went through the locked outside door just in case. There was nothing. The next day, the children came again, but I had to walk them home in the growing dusk a bit earlier than usual, as I had heard 3 heavy pounds from a fist on the inside door, which once again should not have been possible. I went to check again, but there was nothing, just like before. Later that same evening, a customer came in to buy cigarettes. He was a nickel short, but I gave him the pack anyway. As he left, he said to me, "God bless." Immediately, it sounded as if a heavy metal chair was thrown against the inside door. It scared the heck out of the customer. I decided to set up a trail cam to see if I could get a picture of the activity. Of the 6 shots, all were blank except one, which looked to have a glow stick in front of the door between the storage and store. The pounding from there would continue, and the fact that I played a CD of gospel music that ran all night just to piss it off probably didn't help. Eventually, I grew tired of whatever it was that was scaring my customers and the kids. I got some sage and sweetgrass to cleanse the entire building. When I removed the bar that secured the door, it fell inward. The screw holes for the hinges were rounded out. I must admit that bothered me, but I cleansed the inside of the place. There were no further problems that night until I let Red out to do her thing. I watched from the window to make sure she didn't head for the highway, when suddenly she screamed and turned vicious into the damnedest dogfight I'd ever seen against something that I couldn't even see. Whatever she was fighting against, she chased it out of the yard. After that, I had no more problems. This is a true story. There's no exaggeration here. Sometimes weird things happen, and you just can't explain them. I want to give a big thanks to Nicole Goodnight for joining us tonight. If you want to stay up to date with all she does, be sure to follow her on Twitter at @NRGoodnight. You can find stories narrated by her at the No Sleep Podcast, which is personally my favorite podcast. I hope you enjoyed these demonic tales. Always be ready for a cleansing of the supernatural variety. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have your own creepy experience that you want to have narrated, send it to me at darkstories.org. I'm looking specifically for fishing stories, but I'm always accepting a story of any kind. If you want to support the show, check the links in the description. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.